Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. It started on a Wednesday. My husband Tomas and I had been at the Montana property for about 6 weeks by then, settling into the rhythms of a place that required more active maintenance than either of us had fully anticipated when we'd made the decision to relocate from the city. The house was a timber frame build on 11 acres outside a small community that barely qualified as a town, and it had good bones and a history of being well cared for, and we had plans for it that have felt solid and considered. The quiet was the point. We had moved towards the quiet deliberately, and we were still in the phase of appreciating it rather than fighting it. The first night I heard the footsteps, I assumed it was an animal. This is the reasonable assumption, and I want to be clear that I held it for longer than probably served me well, because the reasonable assumption is a comfortable place to stay, and I was not looking for reasons to be uncomfortable in a house I just committed to. The sound came just after midnight. A step, then a pause, then another step, coming from directly overhead, moving from the south end of the roof toward the north in a line that tracked above the upstairs hallway. Deliberate in its pacing, each step placed with the specific weight distribution of something that knew where it was putting itself down. Not scrabbling, not the light random movement of a raccoon or a squirrel working across shingles. Walking, the way something walks when it is going somewhere on purpose. It crossed from south to north and then stopped. I lay in bed and listened to the stopping, and after about 2 minutes, it started back, retracing the same line, south again. And then it was gone, and the roof was quiet. I told Tomas in the morning, and he went up and walked the roof and found nothing, which I expected, and we agreed it was probably a large bird or a fisher cat and left it there. Second night, it came back and walked the same line, and I timed it. 12 minutes, south to north, and back again, and then gone. The third night, same line, 11 minutes. The fourth night, the line was different. Shifted about 4 feet to the west, the same measured pace, but tracking above the bedroom now rather than the hallway. I stopped calling it an animal to myself sometime around the 5th night. There was a man named Birch Tolley who served as a general caretaker for several of the surrounding properties, handling seasonal maintenance and the occasional check-in for absentee owners. He was a compact and weathered man in his 50s who had grown up in the county and stayed, and he came by in the 3rd week of October to winterize the external fixtures, a job the previous owners had arranged and prepaid, and which I'd been notified about by the property management company. He worked efficiently and without much conversation, which I respected, and when he was finishing up, I brought him coffee, and we stood on the porch, and I asked him, keeping it casual, whether he'd heard anything unusual about the property, specifically about the roof. He looked at his coffee cup for a moment. "How long has it been going on?" he asked. I told him about 2 weeks. He nodded slowly, not surprised in the way that would have been reassuring, more like a man confirming something he'd been waiting to hear confirmed. "The Prelwitz place," he said, "about 4 miles east. Family lived there about 8 years. Started hearing something on their roof in the second winter. Gone by spring." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The Sandvik cabin up on the ridge. Couple from out of state. Been there about 3 years when it started. Left inside of 2 months. He looked out at the tree line. Going back further, there were others. I only know the recent ones from direct contact, but the older folks in town could name properties going back a ways. He paused. Nobody who stays in one of these places after it starts seems to stay for long. What is it? I asked. He took a long drink of his coffee and set the cup on the porch railing. I don't know what it is, he said. I know it doesn't come down. Whatever it is, it doesn't touch the ground. And it doesn't stay in one place for long either. It moves, works through properties in this area over time, spends a stretch on each one, and then it's on the next. He looked at me with the directness of someone who has decided you'd rather have the honest version. Nobody who waits to find out what happens at the end of its visit has told me what they found. They just leave before it finishes. I thanked him for telling me, and he nodded and got in his truck and drove out, and I stood on the porch and listened to the property and the trees and the specific quality of the Montana air in late October and thought about what finishing meant. I started mapping the footstep patterns after Birch's visit, not obsessively. I wasn't pulling out graph paper or losing sleep over it beyond the sleep the footsteps themselves were already costing me. I just started paying attention in a more structured way, clocking where above me each night's walking seemed to be tracking based on the sound, noting whether the pattern shifted and in which direction. Tomas thought this was a reasonable response to the situation and also thought we should probably start looking at the calendar and figuring out a timeline for leaving, which I didn't disagree with, but wasn't ready to commit to yet. The pattern over the following 2 weeks was consistent in a way that would have been almost boring if it hadn't been building toward something. Every night, the walking shifted incrementally inward from the perimeter of the roof, moving away from the outer edges and toward the center, tightening its range by a measurable amount each night. And every night, the focal point of the pattern, the place where the steps seemed to converge and linger before moving on, drifted with it, inward and inward, night after night, toward the center of the roof, which was directly above the bedroom. I measured it against the interior ceiling on a Tuesday morning, standing on the bed and marking where the sounds had been loudest each night with a piece of tape. After 10 nights, the tape marks had moved from a spread of about 12 feet to a cluster of about 3, all of them centered over the east side of the bed, Thomas's side. I took the tape down before he came back from the hardware supply run and didn't tell him about the clustering. He went up on the roof on a Thursday. His idea, not mine, and I didn't argue against it because I'd been considering it myself, and the fact that he wanted to do it meant I didn't have to. He took a flashlight and a camera and spent about 40 minutes up there while I stayed inside and listened to him moving around above me, his footsteps heavier and less considered than the nightly visitors. The sound of him a useful reminder of what normal weight on a roof sounded like by comparison. He came down through the attic hatch and met me in the upstairs hallway. He was quiet in a way that was distinct from his regular quiet, and he had his hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the middle distance rather than at me. "There are marks on the shingles," he said. I asked him what kind. Pressure marks, like indentations. The shingles aren't broken, but they're compressed in spots, like something heavy stood in those places repeatedly. He paused. They're in a pattern, starting at the outer edge of the roof and running inward toward the center, tightening. He finally looked at me, like a spiral. I told him about the tape marks on the ceiling. He listened and didn't say anything for a moment. I want to leave this week, he said. It was not a request. I told him I wanted one more night. He looked at me with the expression of a man who knows that arguing will not accomplish anything and who loves me enough to accept that. He said he'd sleep at the motel in town for the night, which was 20 minutes away, and that I should call him the moment I wanted to be picked up. He packed a bag and kissed me and drove out at dusk, and I locked the door behind him and turned on all the lights on the ground floor and sat down to wait. I want to be honest about why I stayed. Not because I was brave and not because I was foolish, though both of those might be partially true. I stayed because the whole shape of the thing, the months of it, the nightly increment of it, the patient and methodical quality of what it had been doing above us, had built in me a need to understand what the process was for, what it was building toward. I'd spent enough nights lying awake listening to something move with obvious intelligence and purpose above my head that leaving without knowing felt like being asked to close a book in the middle of the last chapter. I know that is not a good reason to do what I did. I sat in the kitchen until just after midnight and then turned off the ground floor lights and went upstairs and sat at the end of the bed in the dark and waited. They started at the usual time. The first step on the south end of the roof, the pause, the second step. But the pattern was different tonight. The range of it already narrow, already centered. None of the perimeter walking that had characterized the earlier nights. It came to the center of the roof above the bedroom, and it stayed there. And the steps shifted from the traveling quality of previous nights to something more stationary. A slow rotation of weight, back and forth, side to side. The way a person shifts their weight when they are standing still and looking at something for a long time. It stayed directly above me for almost 20 minutes. The ceiling of the bedroom was 8 feet and finished with drywall, and whatever was above it was close enough that I could hear the texture of its movement in detail I hadn't been able to catch through the whole house ambience of previous nights. The weight of it was substantial. The shingles and the roof decking and the insulation between us compressed slightly with each shift of its weight, and I could feel that compression in the air pressure of the room below, a faint rhythmic change like breathing but slower and more deliberate. Then it moved, not to another point on the roof, to the edge of the roof above the bedroom window. I went to the window before I decided to. That's the most honest way to account for what happened next. My body covered the distance before the thinking part of me had waded. I looked up through the glass. It was at the roofline above the window, having come to the edge and stopped there, and it was looking down. I'm not going to describe it in detail, because the details are the part that I have the most difficulty with when I try to put this into language that stays accurate rather than drifting into something more manageable. I'll tell you the shape of it was wrong in the specific way that something is wrong when it is built along different principles than the things you've spent your life looking at. I'll tell you, it was large enough that its presence at the roofline above the window changed the quality of the night sky visible on either side of it. I'll tell you that the way it was oriented toward me through the glass was not the incidental awareness of an animal that has noticed a light or a movement. It was looking at me the way you look at something you've been waiting to look at for a long time, the way you look at something you have already made a decision about. That was the part that moved me back from the window. Not the shape of it, not the size of it, the quality of the attention, the specific and considered nature of it, the sense of a long process arriving at its intended point, and the understanding that I was the point. I called Thomas while I was already moving down the stairs. He answered before the second ring, and I told him to come, and he said he was already in the car, and I sat on the front porch with every light in the house on behind me and listened to the roof above me, and whatever was on it stayed at the roofline above the bedroom window and did not move until I heard Thomas's headlights coming up the access road, at which point the roof went quiet. We loaded the car in about 40 minutes and drove away before the sun came up. The property went on the market 6 weeks later, priced to sell, and it sold in under 3 weeks to a retired couple from Idaho who'd been looking in that area for over a year. I don't know what to do with that, and I haven't resolved it. I know how the previous owners of the Prelwitz place felt when they sold to the next family, and I know it didn't stop them, and it didn't stop us, and I'm not sure what the alternative looks like. The Idaho couple lasted about 5 weeks. The property listed again in January, and this time it sold even faster, which means either the price dropped significantly or the buyers didn't ask enough questions. And either way, I try not to think about it too much, because thinking about it doesn't change anything, and I'm not sure what the responsible action is when what you know can't be explained in any framework that a buyer or a realtor would engage with seriously. Birch sent me a message in February. 3 sentences. He said the property 2 miles north of ours had gone dark in December, the owners leaving without forwarding a notice. Same pattern as the others. He said whatever it was appeared to have moved on from our place. He said he thought we'd made the right call, which I found both reassuring and insufficient in equal measure. I think about the roofline a lot, about what I saw there, and about the quality of the attention it brought to looking at me through that window, about what the spiral on the roof was building toward, and what the conclusion of it would have looked like if I'd been there to see it. Some nights I lie awake and listen to the roof of whatever building I'm in and track the ordinary sounds it makes, the expansion and contraction of the materials, the wind across the surface, the small random settlements of a structure doing what structures do at night. Ordinary sounds. I know what ordinary sounds like now. I know what the other thing sounds like too, and sometimes, in the specific quality of a night that is slightly too quiet, I find myself wondering whether the thing I saw at the roofline above the bedroom window has a longer memory than the few months it spent on our roof. Whether the circuit it walks is wider than the region Birch described. Whether whatever process it was running on our property, whatever it was moving toward when I looked up through the glass and found it already looking back. Whether that process concludes when the occupants leave, or whether it simply pauses. Whether it picks up where it stopped the next time it finds you. I haven't heard anything on the roofs of the places we've stayed since we left Montana. Not once. But it's only been 8 months. And the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I can't quite settle, is that by my count, 8 months is right around how long we'd been at the property before it started.